All right, awesome. Hello. Thanks, KIKK Festival, for bringing me, and Marie Duchostel for inviting me and bringing Sub, the installation at Grand Manège. For any of you who haven't seen it yet, go. It's up until Sunday. And yes, so Sub is a good example of what I'm working on these days. What I'm working on really for quite a while, towards an idea of natural immersion, probably would be the word. Obviously both digital, computer created, yet physical, where you have to bring your body, your senses into a venue, into a location to have an experience, ideally. I've done this for really quite a period of time. I started 80s, my God. I studied architecture a long time ago in my early 20s, and then switched over to fine arts after meeting a very interesting contemporary called Peter Weibel, who intrigued me with his vast knowledge of certainly art, but also his very contemporary notion at that point in time about what the future likely would bring and how the future would be defined, particularly by digital media computers. So I got my first computer, a illustrious Commodore Amiga, I think, 27 or something, and it's just like really silly to say, but that had such an impact on me in that particular moment, and I pretty much went into a kind of a trance for 1 year. Every so often emerging from it when I felt I haven't seen people in like forever, and I'm starving. I'm starved of social contact, so then I would venture out. That was quite formative. Of course, 100 years later, I'm mostly annoyed by technology, or like irritated, or by all the still infinite problems, the fashions, the ADD that really came with it. I'm anyway, I think, as a character like ADD prone, I easily lose focus, so that's not really helping. Either way, I think the first serious part of my, certainly the part of my career that put me on the map, was a collaboration that I did with a colleague then from East Germany called Ulf Langheinrich. And we built created a band that we called Granular Synthesis. And Granular Synthesis was then a very obscure audio synthesis process, right? Now like a common, let's say, staple in digital audio. And we took audio synthesis, the idea, granular synthesis, the idea, and expanded it into video. And we thought, okay, so you take a grain, you take any material, like a sample, a second of, let's say, video material, which in PAL was 25 frames, and then granular resynthesize it. And we applied this particularly to recordings of human heads that were performers, that were, the first one I think was a colleague, a Viennese dancer called Michael Kramer. And later on, I think the most famous piece really is Motion Control Model 5, which was a Japanese performer, Akemi Takeya, who at the time lived in Vienna. And yeah, let me just show you a moment of this, just an excerpt. Bear in mind that is a 40-minute tour de force performance. And performance meaning, at that time that was quite unusual, so there were only screens, right, projection screens on stage. And Ulf and I were sitting behind the audience as like operators, delivering, if you will, the content and the avalanche that happened. It was a 4-channel piece where, you know, for big, large-scale, monumental projections with a massive PA, more like of a I don't know, like real concert. I mean, we both came from the art world, and we were both really irritated with the compromises and the rather what we felt conservative notions within the art world. Then it was like the time of neo-expressionistic painting, like regurgitation of 20th century avant-gardes. So we wanted to do something a bit more existential, a bit more dramatic, a bit more in your face, certainly inspired by punk and industrial, like the energy, the raw energy that comes out of those movements. I'll just show you an excerpt. Yeah, so it's like a super short sample. I mean, that piece went through a couple of stages, from very like almost melodic, trancey beginning that was misleading, and then led into this crazy scream part of 10 minutes. And at the end was mostly a petering out, a complete, you know, like the battery draining sort of thing, trying to avoid any clear ending. The thinking behind the work, at least from my end, was at the time, I just thought, you know, like this idea of media avalanche, like being so immersed in something that is not natural. I mean, natural, certainly because it's still a human performer, it's the recording of a human performer, but then it's denatured by the simple process of single frame editing, really, and going through it in quasi-algorithmic kind of ways on the editing table, and creating this sort of zombie, right? This zombie being that is both human, right? It reminds of a human, but also a kind of a cyborg, a monster, I don't know, flipping emotions from calm to agitated to tortured, if you will, and so forth. Like a highly inappropriate, in a way, kind of hybrid between the being of Akemi Dokeya, who was, you know, like this classically trained Japanese dancer, performer, singer, and then two men who had whatever ideas about what they wanted to express with this material. So for me, I looked at this actually last week, because it will have its 30-year anniversary. This is really thrilling to me. This was 1994 that it premiered in London, and we'll have an anniversary in San Francisco on December 5. So yeah, if any of you should be there, I hope you come. Gray area in San Francisco. Anywho, so that was a focus of us in the direction of what would potentially happen to humans in the process of being ever more exposed and inundated in omnipresent digital media, which by then was barely digital to begin with. It was still, video was analog, but conceptually I think it was on the horizon. It was completely clear. We did that for a while, and then after I think 10 years of works with bodies and male, female, torso, heads, whatnot, we turned the focus completely inside out and built a couple of abstract landscapes, like digital abstract landscapes. And this was a piece called Feld. I also show a very quick excerpt. Like in essence, it started as a line of light. It flickered, pulsated, morphed over time. Every visual expression followed or like accompanied by some sound, matching sound. And it was like a installation that could be infinitely long depending on whatever given length of a space. It was quite the opposite of Model 5. It worked like this. It was very meditative. It was relaxed. In the process of this, in the process of working with Flickr like extensively, I got more and more interested and intrigued by the idea of what happens in our psyche, in our consciousness, when we are experiencing certain heightened, what's called like heightened triggers, like flickering light, right? It puts us into a state potentially of trance, potentially in this in-between zone where we are both conscious and unconscious at the same time. And so I started researching this particular phenomenon, and eventually on the way, what I was looking for was to create an environment that was like super immersive, super flickering for a really long period of time, like a flickering planet, if you will, but something that was not reminding of like either video or like of an architecture of a given, like a box space or whatever. And I came across like this phenomena that when you fill a given space with a lot of fog, like really a lot of fog so that you don't see your hand like this, and you add stroboscopic and pulse lights into it, then a most mysterious thing happens. It becomes this kaleidoscopic, super immersive infinity impression of patterns that come and go depending on frequencies of stroboscopes and frequencies of pulse lighting. The pulse lights particularly give like very deep spaces, and it's very trippy. it is also, it is both kind of oppressive, illuminating, and sublimely beautiful. So it has this very strange ambiguity, which still fits obviously with the former work that I did with Ulf with granular synthesis, which was always about ambiguity, right? So which I honestly believe is at the core of any art that touches us, or certainly that touches me, something that confounds me, that's something that I can't quite read, certainly not at the moment, that keeps me thinking, that puts me in states of emotions, or like, and that doesn't matter what kind of emotions, right? Can be irritating, can be wonderful, or like happy. It's just like, and so C was, I think, a perfect example for that. That you walk into this, you know. By the way, you see much less in there. This is just trying to give an idea. They're like ropes stretched into the space where you hold on at the beginning, just as guidance wires that bring you into it and towards this sort of extreme, drama of light and sound that unfolds around you. The impression is everywhere. You don't. No matter where you look, it's really 360. Hard to explain. So it's a prototypical thing that you have to see and hear to understand what it is or to experience. And so in the beginning, and this is not unsimilar to Sub at Grand Manège, it's weird, and you feel like, is this dangerous or whatnot? And eventually, as you drift into it, right, you let go. And I often have compared it with a trip really high up in the mountains. If any of you has ever done that, like if you climb up like from a valley floor to, 3,000 meters or something, for the whole day, and at some point you end up all the way on top. So, the higher you go, the more fantastical it becomes, the more sublimely beautiful it becomes, the more dangerous it becomes, the more tired you are. And so this is this kind of weird mixed state that you find yourself in, where you feel this complete intensity of being, of being in the world, right, and moving through the wonder of this world, if you will. So there's some of that in there, and the other part, and because it's so purely artificial, including the fog, which is club fog, right? So it's like hard to breathe in the density. It doesn't feel, the fog certainly doesn't feel natural. But you're in there with your body, you try to make sense of this. And this is the other thing that over time more and more intrigued me, like this understanding of how weird our mind is, how weird our being is in conjunction with our perceptual apparatus. The way that we have to make sense of everything. It doesn't matter, right? The way that there's no abstraction, there is no abstract, because we will read it one way or the other. We will interpret, we will put it into context, we will fit it within all the rest of our experiences of our so far life and our understanding of life and the world. So, this particular piece had, or still has, this issue of photosensitive epilepsy, There is a condition, a clinical condition, if you are allergic to stroboscopic light, to sequenced light, you cannot go in there. It will absolutely trigger you, and there's like statistically, there's 1 in 4,000 people is photosensitive. In there, it's more like 1 in 800 people. So yeah, it's a bit. It's. I think it's an aspect of this work that beyond it's according to most people who come out and feel elevated, inspired, happy, even very strange, that that there's this other side to it, right? If you have this condition, you will have really quite the opposite experience. But I'll show you a little clip of just what people said about it.
I've never felt like that, ever.
Forms are appearing in front of you.
Fractals and B-waves that just moved around in a clockwise direction and a counterclockwise direction.
Different patterns emerging that cross-fade into each other, that spread out.
And the shapes were so beautiful, so beautiful. And the colors
melting into each other, patterns just swirling around each other.
Things flying through the air and
faces and like pieces of wood and stuff that like I knew wasn't there.
Electric crackling around me like lightning, sort of, but on a tiny scale.
You don't know if you're focusing on something 10 feet away or if it's right here.
I was always staring in front for some reason, and then at some point I turned around, and it was the same thing.
You're sort of like, oh, I'm on another planet.
I wasn't sure if things were happening inside my head or
is it in front of me? Is it my eyes that's doing this?
At some point, you just stop and take it in what it's happening, because you cannot really rationalize. You cannot put a narrative. You cannot do it. You just have to take whatever you're saying. And
it's not just kind of a loss of consciousness, a loss of boundary, but it's also very consciously produced, right? So it's aesthetic, so it's paying attention to different patterns.
So it was really exciting. I want to do it again.
I'd like to do it again.
Do it again?
I've got to do it again.
Yeah, I would definitely do it again.
Yeah, most people want to do it again. Anyway, this is, I call, for me, this piece is also like, kind of about like an abundance of light, and which makes clear that we thrive by sunlight, right, or by intense light. Light makes us feel good, generally, no matter what. The brighter, the better, but particularly sunlight, which also has like this, a warm aspect, because the sun gives not just light, but also heat, gifts of heat. And the way I work, it's like after X amount of years doing this, trying to make this a safe experience, which is proved to be impossible, with all the warnings and waivers you sign and everything. I mean, it's about, and I forgot to say, it's about a 10-minute composition, right? You go in there, and you walk in there, it starts up, it builds up, and then at some point it stops. So it's a beginning to end sort of performative installation, if you will. And after that, I was really thinking of getting more and more intrigued about doing the opposite, like complete darkness, especially because there is no complete darkness. I have seen the last time in this world anymore. The last time I've seen a uninterrupted or unlight polluted image of the Milky Way, of the glorious galaxy we live in, was, I think, in the Caribbean like 15 years ago. It's really, really hard to find a place nowadays, unless you go to the Arctic, Antarctic, or like, far off any civilized places, to have at night complete darkness. So, I mean, that was, I think at the time I was thinking about, I had, I came across like a I was at a symposium, and there was this professor that from Columbia, Noam M. Elcott, who was working on this book in artificial darkness, where he was particularly, talking about like the need for artificial darkness in like starting in the 19th century, certainly then in the 20th century, to create theatrical spaces that were artificially dark in order to control whatever drama that is set to unfold in there. Starting with Wagner, right, for sure. And nowadays, I think that's a staple. We know all these dark rooms that are more or less insulated towards light from the outside. And so that is what brings me to the work that I'm showing here. Sub. There are 3 pieces by now: Souls, Sub, and Echo. 3 compositions. The Sub in particularly is from, I think, shortly before the pandemic started, and at the late 19. And it is a, what intrigues me about this is, of course, spending an enormous amount of time in such a space, in this kind of weirdness of complete darkness, where very clearly, your mind works differently. But like there's an atavistic sort of element, like an atavistic element of fear connected to darkness that goes way back to probably pre-civilization, when everything that was dark was attached or connected to potential danger and risk, and you can't see just that our visual sense, which is our main sense we rely on, is blocked, is driving us nuts. What happens is that we automatically accentuate or switch to a heightened awareness, sonic awareness. So we hear more, or we hear more consciously, and we are much more alert in a completely dark space. Every time I set this up, like I did before the opening here, it's astonishing to me to see that as long as the light is on, that the soundscape feels somehow doesn't work, feels, I don't know, like weird and stuff. And then the moment the light goes off, right, voila, it works, because it's designed, it's composed for darkness. And so are the images. The images are created and designed in a quite lengthy process in order to elicit certain after images. So there's the initial print, which is about 1/3 of a second, which runs on, that work runs on 60 frames a second, so 1/3 of a second, it's about 20 frames of animation. And so there's this, and then there's what you see on your night vision receptors after image. The poetic part for me of the work is that to some extent it is about it's about watching the presence like fading away, right? This is now, and it's already gone. So there is this kind of, which creates this kind of strange waiting state. Also, for me anyway, attached to like this ADD moment in time, where there's, like always the next trigger, always the next impulse, always the next sensation that we take in, that we one way or the other wait for. The idea of not being not being fed or not being served anything is sort of weird at this point. It's also known that in prison systems, like I think solitary confinement in complete darkness is considered to be torture within, I think, a week. Most people break within 10 days, like without anything, right? So there's this you in a dark space with nobody to talk to, with no sounds that you hear, like nothing other than somebody bringing by food every so often. It's excruciating. We're so trained in this kind of the social animals we are, and the interactive animals we are, and the interactive minds we have, that is very hard to stomach. So of course in sub it's quite a bit easier. You just have to wait a little bit. There's always sound. The after images will last really long if you go closer to the display. That the closer you are to the display, the exponentially brighter the impression will be, and the more it will fill your view field, and the longer these after images will last. So, yeah, the other work in the series is called Soul. It's more of from a square format, and I mean this is one of those things. It makes really no sense to show the photos or the or any documentary, because again, this is work that needs you to be there in the flesh with your body and your being, and all of these photos are sort of really awkward vehicles to give some sense of what you possibly will see, but you won't see the after image. You will not understand the darkness. You will not understand like the approach, how you enter the space, right? Which is actually really nice at a Grand Manège, where you have this long hallway that brings you in, and then the last corner is really completely dark, and where all of a sudden everything slows down. This is the other aspect, just the slowing down that you have to, like the day-to-day falls away. It's like you have to switch to another modus. You also have to leave your phones behind. You have to leave your light-emitting devices behind to not disturb the darkness. So there's no texts, no anything. Kind of an oasis in the in our anyway. You better go there if you haven't done it yet to see it, and I have, I think, a couple of minutes left. If any of you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll show. I mean, I talked about today really particularly and predominantly about the immersive work I'm doing. I'm doing quite a bit of other things as well, most lately sculptures, but yeah. Okay. I think